and today we will be discussing the new Fronius commercial inverter, which will be the Fronius Tauro inverter. I'd like to introduce your Fronius team for today. I am Mohammed Sidat. I'm the Technical Sales Advisor for Fronius. I operate from Fronius South Africa, which is an agency of Fronius International. I'd also like to introduce my two colleagues, Cyprian Kolo, who is the Technical Sales Advisor for Fronius for English-speaking Western Africa. And I'd also like to introduce my colleague, David Mwangi, who is the Technical Sales Advisor for Eastern Africa. Having a look at today's agenda, we will start off with an overview of Fronius solutions for commercial systems. We'll then move on to plant design and choice of inverter. Then looking at the motivation behind why we created the Fronius Tauro. We'll also have a look at the cost optimization and a look at your total cost of ownership. We will then move on to how the Tauro enables maximum yield. Then going on to the Tauro at a glance. Lastly, with further information, and we'll then conclude with a quick Q&A session. Again, I'd like to encourage you to please ask any questions in the question tab, and we will try our best to answer all the questions in this webinar. Okay, let's meet the inverter. So in terms of our commercial range, we will, in a few weeks' time, have 4 inverters that are tailor-made for the commercial PV sector. Starting off with the Fronius Eco, which will still be on the market for many more years to come. And the reason for this is due to the sheer popularity of this Eco inverter. It comes in power classes of 25 or 27 kilowatts, and your MPPT voltage range is between 580 volts to 850 volts DC. Then having a look at the Fronius Simo, which again will stay on the market for many more years to come. It's in the power variance of 10 to 20 kilowatts, and the MPPT voltage range is from 200 to 800 volts DC. Okay, so you can see that substantial difference between the two. The reason for this is that the Fronius Simo has a buck boost circuit integrated. So your MPPT voltage range is much larger. Then moving on to the Fronius Tauro, this will be the new 50 kilowatt commercial inverter. Your MPPT voltage range will be between 400 to 870 volts. Again, this inverter will have 3 trackers. Then having a look at the Fronius Tauro Eco, okay, this inverter will either come in a power class of 50 kilowatts or 100 kilowatts, and its MPPT voltage range will be between 580 volts to 930 volts DC. So with the Fronius Tauro, as you all do know in commercial systems, the likelihood of the inverter being installed outdoors is actually quite high. And for this reason, we decided to design an inverter that can actually handle outside conditions. Okay, so with the Fronius Tauro, this is the exterior of the inverter. It's made out of a hard shell, okay, double core hard shell. And the core inside, we call it a very smart core because the core inside contains all your power electronics for the inverter. If you're looking at further facts on the Fronius Tauro Eco, the power classes is either 50 kilowatts or 100 kilowatts. It has a single tracker. Your MPPT voltage range is between 580 to 930 volts. So again, you've got a very wide MPPT voltage range, which is really great for string planning. Also, your maximum DC voltage per string is 1000 volts DC. So for example, if you are going to purchase the 100 kilowatt Fronius Tauro, you can have 22 strings of 1000 volts DC connected directly to the inverter. Whereby if you go for the 50 kilowatt Tauro, you can have up to 14 strings of 1000 volts DC connected directly to the inverter. In terms of the weight, for the 50 kilowatt Tauro, it's going to weigh about 72 kilograms, and for the 100 kilowatt Tauro, it's going to weigh about 101 kilograms. So again, we're kind of market leading in terms of weight to power class ratios. Okay, having a look at the second variant, which is just called the Fronius Tauro. Okay, this power class is 50 kilowatts. It's got 3 trackers. Okay, and the thing about the trackers is, if you looked at the previous inverter, it was called the Tauro Eco, which only had 1 tracker. Whereas this one, we've just named it as Fronius Tauro. Eco stands for economical. So as you all know, to purchase an inverter with 1 tracker will always be cheaper than purchasing an inverter with 3 trackers. Not just cheaper, but much cheaper, because trackers can be quite expensive in the solar business. But anyways, with the Tauro, you have 3 trackers. Okay, so this is really good for field installations that are all pointing in different directions. And MPPT voltage range is quite wide, from 400 to 870 volts DC, and your maximum DC voltage will be 1000 volts DC per string. Okay, in terms of the weight will be 74 kilograms. So with the Fronius Tauro, we always have a look at this fact, good performance, which again always requires strong devices. So with Fronius, we're very renowned in the solar business for probably creating the most reliable products in the market. And the reason for this is that we always strive to use durable materials and electronics. Okay, so before any inverter is released onto the market, it always goes through quite rigorous testing for at least 1 or 2 years. And again, we always test to different conditions to ensure that your product will always give you the good performance that we are known for. Okay, we also have compact product design, and for this, we've achieved it through onboard features and again through our power stage system, which we will chat about, especially in next week's webinar. We also have the spacious product design, and again, this allows for more space for possibilities. And we also have a smart product design, which again, one of those smart product designs is the double wall system. So with the Fronius Tauro, we don't just have one single wall which separates the exterior of the inverter from the interior. We have a double wall system. And the advantage of this is that with our Tauro, we can install it directly in sunlight, okay, outside, and the inverter will not derate up until 50 degrees Celsius ambient temperature. What makes the Tauro so special? The first thing is system monitoring. So all the hardware is already integrated on board, and this is in the form of the pilot card, which has very similar capabilities to the data manager. The only real advantages of the pilot over the data manager is that with the pilot, we now have possibilities for 2 Modbus RTU ports, and we also have 2 Ethernet ports as well. Extremely robust. Again, this is for unprotected outdoor installations. So with the Tauro, it's really cool because you can install it on the floor. Okay. The only thing that you need between the floor and the Tauro is the mounting bracket, which we'll talk about later on. You can also pole mount the Tauro directly underneath your panels, or you can even wall mount your Tauro as well. With the Tauro, we've again strived towards easy installation. And the reason why we can always achieve easy installation with our products is that before we release any product onto the market, we always take input from installers, and inputs from installers are then used to design our products. Okay, so our products are always very installer friendly. With the Tauro, we'll also have the capability to do AC to AC chaining. Basically what that means is that you can connect the AC out of one Tauro to the AC in of the Tauro next to it, up to 200 kilowatts. Okay, so the advantage there is you can now cut down on the amount of AC cabling you will need for your system. You also have a cost reduction, and this is due to extremely high flexible design. Okay. And lastly, we also have easy rapid service. So with the Fronius Tauro, you can do power stack replacement on site. So if the power stack does go, you can just request a new one from Fronius and do the replacement on site. You do not need to send the inverter back to Fronius and wait for a few weeks. There's nothing of that sort. You will get instant rapid service. What was the motivation behind the creation of the Fronius Tauro? Well, firstly, we always wanted a new inverter that can even achieve higher yields. Also, a rapid amortization of a system, and also low total cost of ownership. Okay, so we use these three factors in order to design our Fronius Tauro. In a commercial PV system, what does the cost usually consist of? So we generally have, let's call it your capex costs, which are your capital expenditures. So this could be stuff such as purchasing PV modules, purchasing the Fronius inverter, purchasing cables, etc. And your OPEX is your operational expenditures, which could be what are the costs of doing monitoring for your client, what is the cost of sending a technician to site every time there's an issue, etc. And using these two factors, we then look at your total cost of ownership. Okay, so with Fronius, we don't only look at the capex, we also look at the opex to ensure that we can combine the two to offer a product that at the end of the day has the best total cost of ownership on the market. Let's have a look at the capex costs. So for a commercial system, a capex is usually composed of the following hardware pieces. The first one would be the PV module costs, okay, which again compromises the majority of the cost of the capex costs of a PV system, up to about 44%. Okay. Then if you look at the BOS, which is your balance of system costs, in this example, it's around 33%. Then having a look at the labor costs, which again is around 14%. And lastly, having a look at the inverter costs. As you can see, in the capex costs, the inverter cost is actually the least of the other major components of your capex costs. So again, my recommendation is an inverter is the most important part of a PV system, but is not the most expensive part of the PV system. So at the end of the day, you should always try to strive for the best quality inverter, because for you as an installer, you're really going to cut down on your OPEX costs going in that direction. Let's have a look at your BOS cost, which stands for balance of system costs. So your balance of system costs is usually composed of the mounting frame, cable trays, AC/DC cabling and combiner, as well as your mains connection. What's very important to note is that with the Fronius Tauro, we directly target each of these factors in order to try and reduce your balance of system costs. Okay, which my colleagues will explain a bit later on in today's webinar. Before I hand over to my colleague, David, I'd like to quickly launch a poll. I'll really appreciate if everybody could just share the inputs to this poll. The question is, how do you typically realize a 100 kilowatt PV system? Do you normally do this using a single 100 kilowatt inverter? Or do you go for the multiple inverters in parallel approach? Okay, I will be closing the question in the next 10 seconds. Okay, to share the results. Okay, so a lot of today's attendees still prefer to compose a 100 kilowatt PV system using multiple inverters in parallel. This is actually a smart move, because if you have one single 100 kilowatt inverter and there's an issue with it, your total system is down. Whereas if you have 3 or 4 inverters in parallel, and if there's an issue with one of them, your other inverters are still operating and the system can still almost be to its full capability. Okay, again, from Fronius, we suggest for any system less than 100 kilowatts that you still use the Fronius Simo and the Fronius Eco. And for any system greater than 100 kilowatts, you now start to look at the Fronius Tauro. Okay, David, I'd like to hand over to you.
All right, so thank you so much, Mohammed, for the first part of the presentation. So I'll now be taking over and doing the second part. If you could give me the presenter rights to show the screen, please. Okay, thank you. So let's now look at how to optimize the total cost of ownership using the Tauro commercial inverter. So how can we realize savings on the balance of system costs? Like my colleague has already mentioned, this was one of the motivation behind coming up with a Fronius commercial inverter in the range of 50 to 100 kilowatt, and which we are now referring as the Tauro series. So when you look at the balance of system costs, we are able to do a lot of savings with a design flexibility. So what does this mean? It means that we are going to optimize the pre-combined. So as far as the Tauro inverter is concerned, you can order different variations. So you can have what we call a pre-combined or a direct version. And this is of course going to depend on the type of system that you're going to install. Are you going to go for a centralized design, or are you going to design a decentralized design? So in the next few slides, we are going to look at the specifics of both the design variations and at which point you should order which variation of the Tauro inverter. So this is important for you to understand. So also in terms of the innovative design options, this can also help you to save on your balance of system costs. My colleague has already talked about the AC/DC chaining that is possible with the Tauro series of inverters. And this basically allows you to make a lot of savings on your AC cabling that you'd normally use for inverters that do not support AC/DC chaining. Also in terms of the flexible connection as far as cabling is concerned, with the Tauro inverter, you can go in with anywhere from 35 millimeter square cross section up to about 240 millimeter square on the AC side. So, and that of course would also depend on the distances that are involved from the inverter to the transformer or the point of interaction, and also the amount of power that you want to transport through that particular cable. So let's look at now the Tauro versions that will be available for you to order. So we'll have 3 variants, but which can also be summarized into 2 major categories. So in essence, we are going to have a Tauro Eco 50 and also a Tauro Eco 100 kilowatts. So the 50 basically stands for the power handling capacity, and we have also the 100 kilowatt version. So if you look at the 50 version kilowatt, we have 2 major areas. We have the power stack area. So we just have one power stack for the 50 kilowatt version, meaning that the power stack that is fitted in the 50 kilowatt Tauro Eco is just one and handling the entire AC power distribution. And then we have 2 DC switches in the 50 kilowatt version. When you come to the Eco 100 kilowatt, we are going to have 2 power stacks. So we are going to have one power stack handling one half of the power capacity, which is 50 kilowatt, and the next one handling the next half of the 50 kilowatts. So this makes it a very good proposition, because if one power stack was to become faulty, your inverter can still continue to operate at half the AC power capacity. In terms of the DC switches, we are going to have 2 to 3 DC switches, and these are also going to depend on the number of MPPTs that are built into the Eco inverter. We are going to have the possibility to have 1 up to 3 maximum MPPTs in an Eco inverter. But the bigger summarization of the Tauro version of the commercial inverters from Fronius can be classified into 2, what we call the pre-combined and the direct versions. So looking at the pre-combined and the direct versions, just for you to understand what this means. In the pre-combined version, we are talking about an inverter that is positioned quite a distance from your PV array, and therefore you are coming with either 2 big cables from the PV array into the inverter DC area, And then looking at the direct version, or what you call the decentralized design, is whereby the inverter is getting fed directly from the PV array strings. So the strings are connected directly using MC4 plugs into the inverter. So how to therefore save the BOS costs with design flexibility as far as the central and the decentralized designs are concerned? When you talk about the centralized design, which is now the pre-combined version of the inverter, we are talking about the possibility to come in with up to 6 DC connections. So this can be 2 minus connections, 2 plus connections, and up to 6 connections in total. Looking at the decentralized version, we are talking about the possibility to connect your inverter directly from the PV array strings. So you can have a maximum of up to 22 MC4 plugs included in your decentralized or the direct inverter version. As far as the cable cross sections for the AC side, that will remain the same, regardless of whether you've ordered a direct or a pre-combined version. So what is important to note here is that the cable glass that you require for the DC connection area for the centralized or the pre-combined version will come integrated into the inverter. So you don't need to worry about looking for appropriate cable glass. So the decentralized version or the direct version will also offer one more advantage, that will be the possibility for you to do direct string monitoring. Because the strings are directly connected to the inverter, it will be possible for you to monitor or to achieve string level monitoring. So that makes it even more flexible as far as monitoring is concerned. The cable size remains the same for the AC side, but you have for string protection also the possibility to use string fuses, and depending on how much power then or current you're feeding per string, you can freely select the amperages of the fuses to be used. Let's now continue and looking at the BOS costs further, how to save with 240 millimeter square cable cross sections. This is the biggest cross section, of course, that can be connected to the Tauro inverter. And this helps a lot when you are running the AC cabling for longer distances. So very long distances, you have to be very careful about the cross section of the cable that you're going to use, because at the end of the day, the total cost of ownership is also related or has a relationship to the system losses that you encounter on a daily basis. So if you design a system for 1 megawatt and you have losses of up to nearly 50 kilowatt, something like this, depending on the cables, then your rate of return on investment becomes much longer, and therefore that also affects the total cost of ownership and makes the ratio to go slightly higher than would be recommended. So in terms of flexibility with the cable type, we have not restricted the cable type that you can use with the Tauro inverter. So you are free to use either aluminum or cable copper types, and no need for additional AC combiner boxes. So, and this is one of the biggest gains regarding the use of the daisy chaining topology. So when you have a maximum of 200 kilowatts, you can choose to connect two 100 kilowatt Tauro inverters, and you daisy chain the AC connections. And if you choose to use the 50 kilowatt version, you can connect using daisy chaining up to 4 of the 50 kilowatt inverters to make 200 kilowatts. And therefore that brings a lot of savings as far as the AC combiner boxes. As you may know, an AC combiner box for anything from 100 kilowatts to 200 kilowatt is not necessarily cheap. And if you can save on the cost for that, that is a huge plus for you to consider using the Tauro inverter for your commercial installations. So there are no special tools required. As you saw with the direct version, you can basically come with an MC4 plug and you connect all your string cabling directly into the inverter. And that makes also the effort for installation when you're using the Tauro very, very low. Let's continue on how you can also realize more savings with, as far as balance of system components are concerned, with AC daisy chaining. So as I've already mentioned, you can have a maximum of 200 kilowatts, and that means using 2 by 100 kilowatt Tauro inverters Eco, or you can use 4 by 50 kilowatts Tauro Eco inverters. And the way you realize this savings as far as cables are concerned using the DC chaining topology is fewer AC cables will be required overall. So, and the normal topology therefore, or the configuration would look like this. You have your transformer at the very end here, and then all the inverters, probably from the transformer to the first inverter is a distance of about 50 meters. And then from the first inverter like that to the last inverter, we're talking about using the 50 kilowatt versions, you have them spaced by 50 meters apart. So if you do not have the daisy chaining capability, it would mean, of course, every inverter would have to go through, or every 2 inverters would have to go through an AC combiner box. And therefore, the cost of your balance of system, as far as the combiner boxes is concerned, would double. But in this case, we are also cutting the cost as far as the distances of the AC cabling is concerned. Therefore, what you need is just one AC disconnector when you have a power block of up to 200 kilowatts using the Tauro inverter. And therefore, as far as saving your costs is concerned, that is also a very big winner and a point that you should address in your design cases. Also, you will achieve more yield when you're doing AC daisy chaining, and this will be due to less cable losses. So with AC daisy chaining, just to bring the point home, you will have the AC connection area of the inverter, and this connection area of the inverter will have what we call the in and out. So the connection for this particular inverter, for instance, could be the lower part when you're talking about 3 phase connections and neutral plus protective earth. And then the second inverter will also come through the same connection block. And this therefore eliminates the need for you to have an AC combiner box. So let's now look at and compare different scenarios that you can encounter in the field. And these scenarios are looking at an installation of up to 200 kilowatt on the PV side. And therefore, that means you would require a minimum of 2 inverters, maybe 100 kilowatts Tauro. So we have one consideration or one comparison that is with an AC combiner box. And therefore, we see that from the first inverter, we are covering a distance of about 50 meters. And from the second inverter to the transformer, we are covering another distance of 50 meters and about 3 meters from the second inverter to the AC combiner box. With the second consideration, we are talking about an installation without an AC combiner box, and therefore we are talking about each inverter being connected directly into the transformer, and therefore we will have or require 2 AC disconnectors per inverter. So in this particular case, we also look at an installation with the Fronius Tauro with AC daisy chaining for the same power block, which is 200 kilowatts. And therefore, we can see that we are going to achieve much shorter cable distances. So if you look at this installation without a combiner box, we can talk about 150 meters that you require of cabling. When you talk about the first example with an AC combiner box, the cable distances is slightly shorter than without a combiner box. But then again, we also incurring the cost of the AC combiner box here. But with the Fronius Tauro AC daisy chaining, you're able to achieve a much shorter distance of the cables, because if you assume that we are going to have the same distance from the farthest inverter to the transformer of about 100 meters, then we are still able to cover that entire 100 meters by daisy chaining the first inverter to the second one, and then from the second inverter going directly to the inverter, to the transformer. And therefore, in this case, in the transformer, we require only one AC disconnector. Also, in this particular case, with the AC combiner, we are going to require, in addition to the AC combiner box, one AC disconnector here. And therefore, we can see the cost with an AC combiner is actually will definitely be slightly high because we need the AC combiner as well as the AC disconnector. In this case, we are going to incur the cost of 2 AC disconnectors in addition to much longer cable distances. So the longer we cover with the cables, the more the likelihood that you are going to have cable losses in your system. So so let's now look at a distance of about how to use the Tauro inverter for longer distances. In this particular case, we are talking about connecting a 100 kilowatt Tauro inverter to a transformer. And in this case, the power losses can be summarized as follows, as we can see in this graph, that we are talking about a consideration whether you are going to compare the direct version or the pre-combined version. And starting off from a neutral position here, which is, we can call it 50 meters to the transformer. So anytime you are 50 meters and below to the transformer, we can see that the cost here of your balance of system components will be much lower when you are considering to use a direct version of the Tauro. And this is the inverter version, whereby the string cables are connected directly to the inverter. As we can see, for the same distances from, let's say, 0 to 50 meters, the cost of the pre-combined version, and this is whereby the inverter is a slight distance, or you are going to go into the inverter with a maximum of 6 DC connections, will be slightly higher when the distance is much shorter. On the flip side, we see that once the distance exceeds 50 meters, the decision to use a direct version starts losing the gains that you saw when the distance was not as long. And the opposite happens, that the pre-combined version starts to gain a lot of advantage over the direct version of the inverter. And therefore, we can see that at this intersection point going forward, the combined or the pre-combined inverter version is making a lot more sense for your design case. So anytime you encounter and you are considering to use the Tauro versions of the commercial Fronius inverters, and the distance from the inverter to the point of interaction or the transformer is less than 50 meters, we would recommend that you go for the direct version of the Tauro inverter. And when that distance exceeds 50 meters, we would recommend that you go for the pre-combined version of the Tauro. This is important for you to note, because when you are doing your orders, you have to specify which Tauro version you would like to purchase, whether the direct or the pre-combined versions. So, and therefore, as a conclusion, we can say that the most cost-effective variant will be, or will depend on the distance between the PV system and the point of interaction, as well as cable prices. And therefore, in summary, we say for you to use the direct version, consider a situation where you have shorter distances from the PV array to the inverter. And if you have the opposite, where you have facing long distances from your PV array to the inverter, we do recommend the pre-combined version. So also another way for you to achieve more savings as far as balance of system components are concerned is with the integrated monitoring. As you know, all Fronius inverters have the required hardware for monitoring integrated, so you do not need to procure any additional gadgets when you buy the Fronius Tauro, for instance. Everything that you need for remote monitoring is integrated, and this also enables for third-party monitoring to be done. So there are open interfaces that would allow for third-party monitoring also to be achieved. And Fronius SolarWeb, also through the pilot that is integrated in the Fronius Tauro, will allow you to do remote monitoring without any additional costs. So this is also a big winner because you have some cases in the market whereby you have to purchase the inverter separately, and also the monitoring gadgets are also purchased as a separate, let's say, component. So also, as far as the SPDs are concerned, this is also something that you should also take note of, that the SPDs that are required for protection on the DC side are already integrated into the Fronius Tauro inverter. And this as standard is a type 1 and 2 integrated. And type 2 can be integrated as an option. If you require type 2 instead of type 1 and 2, you can specify that when you're making your orders. So, and this is important because you are not going to incur also additional costs when you're trying to think about SPDs for your inverter. Also, another important thing for the Tauro Eco inverters, the 50 and 100 kilowatts, because they have only one MPPT, it therefore means that you require only one set of voltage protection devices. For inverters with more than one MPPT, it would be required in some legislations that you have SPDs to protect each channel of the MPPTs. And therefore, right from the start, when you're choosing your inverter, you have to consider for which application you want to use this inverter. Are you going to do it for a ground mount system or a rooftop system? So maybe a ground mount system would be more ideal when you think about an inverter with only one MPPT, because the solar irradiation will be uniform throughout the day if the panels are facing the same direction or the same orientation. For a roof mount system, you might want to consider an inverter with 1 or 2 or 3 MPPTs, depending on the complexity of the roof structure. So it might be that the roof structure might not allow uniform distribution of solar irradiation throughout the day, and therefore you might require an inverter that can handle those kind of variations. Therefore, that means that an inverter with additional MPPTs will have additional costs for SPDs, because each MPPT channel has to be protected accordingly. Therefore, we look at the Tauro Eco version of the commercial inverter, optimizing the BOS cost as far as the SPDs are concerned, because you only require one set for the one MPPT that is included. So additional in terms of that, we also can do customization for you. If you do require an AC disconnector, that can be integrated as an option for you. And once you choose to have this integrated into the inverter as an option, then please take note that this is going to limit your ability to do AC daisy chaining with the Tauro inverters. Also, remote control is possible because the Tauro inverters do have 10 programmable digital IOs, and this can also assist you, just like with the other Fronius Snap inverters, to do a lot of controlling, even ripple control signals and stuff like that. So I have come to the end of my part, and I'll be launching a poll just before I hand over to my colleague Cyprian. And my poll is all about how many MPPTs you think are enough in a commercial inverter. So we would appreciate if you can share your feedback with us, and also after the poll, I'm going to share the results with you just to see what is your perception on this MPPTs issue. So I'll be closing the poll in the next, let's say, 30 seconds. So kindly give us your feedback on it. Okay, so just about 10 seconds, then I close and share the results with you. I see that a good number of you have already given us your feedback. So I'll be closing just about now, and I'll share the results. So we can see that the biggest percentage of our attendees today think that an inverter with 2 MPPTs would be ideal, followed by another chunk of 27% who think that an inverter with 4 MPPTs would be ideal. And then you have 13% share split between those who think that an inverter with 3 MPPTs is good enough, and another 13% thinks that 1 MPPT is sufficient. As I have already mentioned, the choice of the inverter, the number of MPPTs that are integrated, will be or will rely on the complexity of the system design. So if you're going to do a ground mount and all the panels are going, or the modules are going to be oriented in the same direction, you honestly do not need an inverter with more than 1 MPPT. However, for roof mount system, or in situations whereby you think that your ground mount system could have panels oriented in different directions, then you can think about an inverter with multiple MPPTs. And therefore, our 50 kilowatt Tauro would be ideal also, because it will have a maximum of 3 MPPTs, the other variant. And you can make a lot of design choices as far as we've seen the cost, or saving the cost of a balance of systems is concerned, because at the end of the day, these are benefits that you're also going to pass on to your end users or the owners of the systems. So at this point, I want to hand over to my colleague, Cyprian, to take over and do the remaining bit of the presentation. Cyprian?
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot, David, for your wonderful and well-detailed presentation. So I will be continuing from this point and tell us more about how the Tauro can save costs. So in terms of cost saving, we're now talking about labor costs. Okay, so how does the Tauro save on labor costs? Of course, with its easy installation. The Tauro is equipped with what we call rapid installation technology. This implies simply implies a quick and easy installation. Because it will, of course, make it easy for installation with just 2 or 3 persons. And as you can see from this, from the bubble, as you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see that a horizontal installation is possible even under direct sunlight, which makes the Tauro actually stand out when it comes to flexibility in installation, and of course, its fast and quick and easy nature of installing. And of course, it is flexible mounting in unprotected outdoor areas possible. And of course, as I said earlier, horizontal mounting is also possible. Great, and how best to describe just so wanted to use a video illustration to show us how best we can actually achieve this. Let's see if this would go. So in other words, it is quite easy to install. I was having a bit of technical issues with the video, but then we will post it subsequently so that you can have a good view of how this is done. So it's quite easy to install. For wall mount situations, all you need is just 6 screws, as would have been showed in the video. And once the screws are properly aligned, you can now have the wall mount bracket installed. And then afterwards, you can now install you can now mount the inverter. So this is, of course, possible with 2 or 3 persons. And there are alignment screws just below the wall mount bracket, which helps you to align the inverter properly to the wall mount bracket. So that being said, it also saves labor cost with its flexibility in terms of cable selection. Be it single core or multiple core, it of course has a range of diameters or size of cables that can be used to carry out a connection, and of course, which of course makes it pretty flexible for the design engineer to select a cable which is corresponding to a particular design that he or she wants to achieve. And then, of course, you also have the option of daisy chaining, like my colleagues have earlier stated. Just as you can see from the illustration by the right-hand side of your screen. So you have a whole range of option of connection. And all you have to do is to make your choice from either single core or multi-core, or even if it's a daisy chaining choice. Great. So how can you save on OPEX? Much has been said about CAPEX. So to look at how the Tauro can, help us in terms of the operating expenditures. Good. So in terms of OPEX, the reduction of OPEX costs, this we achieve via a unique service process. This we mean that in case of any issue, any anomaly, the entire device does not have to be replaced. This is made possible because of the modularized nature of the Tauro, meaning that, like I said earlier, the entire device does not need to be replaced. Take an example of the power stage, which weighs about 25 kilograms. So instead of replacing the entire device, the power stage can simply be replaced on site by just 1 person, which of course saves significant time and cost, because just 1 person needs to do this replacement. So an entire team of engineers or technicians doesn't have to go to site, which is a very, very big plus when it comes to OPEX cost saving. And then with that also comes less maintenance. With this, basically, with the low frequency of visits to sites of the site engineer or technician, this of course comes with or leads or yields or gives you less operational or operating costs. By so, it is of course thanks to active cooling technology implemented in the Tauro, because by so doing, it ensures maintenance-free operation of the inverter, and of course with longer component service life. The fan and cooling elements in the inverter ensures internal air circulation, and of course prevents hot spots. And once hot spots are prevented, especially in the case of power electronics, it ensures that your product or the device, in this case the Tauro, functions optimally. So this of course means that there will be no need for any prescribed maintenance intervals by the specialist. Good. So having said that, how does the Tauro now enable maximum yield? Because yes, indeed, we've been talking about costs all this while. So, but of what good will be the reduction in costs when your device cannot yield maximally? So now let's take a look at how much the yield of the Tauro is. Good. The Tauro has maximum yield always, even under harsh temperature conditions, because of its double wall and cooling system. As you can see from the illustration, there are double doors. We have an outer door and an inner door. This in turn helps the inverter to function optimally despite the heat, that is if installed outdoors and under direct sunlight per se. So with this double wall system, the front cover provides an insulation to the inner cover. And this inner cover, of course, protects the power electronics inside the inverter. Now, the power electronics component inside this inverter happens to become 13.5 degrees less in temperature or cooler inside due to the active double wall cooling. So this ensures that the inverter continues to perform or yield maximum yield, even up to 50 degrees centigrade of ambient temperature, which of course leads to late power derating as compared to our competitors. And of course, yields or leads to longer service life of the inverter. Good. So this is of course illustrated by the diagram you can see on the bubble. Good. So after that's been said, we'll now look at maximum yield with low cable losses. As we all know, or might know, cable losses are actually inversely proportional to the cross-sectional area of the cable. So this invariably means that the higher the cross-sectional area of a cable, the lower the cable loss. So with this, it of course is an advantage or a plus on the side of the Tauro, because we can connect up to 240 mm squared cable cross-section on the AC side, and of course we can have up to 95 mm squared of cable connection cross-section on the DC side. And of course, with the AC daisy chaining, it of course leads to lesser or shorter cable being used in interconnection. And of course, this also contributes to lower cable losses. And in order to address this fact, we actually have an example project, a 2 megawatt project in Austria that implemented different cable lengths. And the costs or the losses on the cable length was extrapolated for up to a period of 20 years. And for the use of a 240 mm squared cable, we incurred in this project a cable loss of just over 16,000 euros. That's across the period of 20 years. And then we have the other costs of the respective cable lengths but most significantly, for the use of 95 mm² cross-section cable of the same length of 125 meters, incurred cable loss of over 40,000 euros. Now, if you do the math between the 240 mm² and the 95 mm², you will be saving up to 24,000 euro by using the 240 mm² cable. So this is, of course, a very, very huge advantage presented on the side of the Tauro. So because of its ability to handle a cross-section cable of up to 240 mm². Good. So this, of course, means that losses, of course, have huge impact on the overall yield. So let's have a look at how the easy powering nature of the Tauro really helps in making life very, very easy. Yeah, in a case where we want to renew an old system, let's say a system consisting of 2 inverters, each having a connection area or cable connection of 120 mm². So in replacing them with 1 unit of a Tauro, it means that because of the AC-DC chaining capability, you can now combine both cables within 1 device, since the Tauro can handle the both cross-sectional area of the cable, of the connection cables in question. Yeah, so we've actually talked a lot about the Tauro and its attributes. So lest we forget, let's have a quick glance at the Tauro once again, and then just hover over all the attributes as we have earlier mentioned. Yes, so the Tauro, the Fronius Tauro, of course, offers flexible system design, as we've been earlier told by my colleagues. We have an option of a centralized or decentralized variant of a connection. It also comes with a rapid installation technology, which makes it quite easy for installation. In terms of service and maintenance, this is easily done because it can be carried out by just 1 person on site. Of course, with its double wall system, it helps protect your device and ensures that your device functions optimally and produces maximally, even under harsh temperature conditions. In terms of surge protection, it has a type 1+2 surge protection device integrated as a standard. And I must note here that if you require the type 2, it can also come, but that is, of course, an optional request. So how about monitoring? Yes, with SolarWeb, you can, of course, monitor your device remotely. And it comes with open interfaces, which enables or facilitates third-party interaction. And then when we come to the AC-DC chaining, it makes cable handling and connection very, very easy to achieve, all thanks to the Fronius Tauro. So, having said that, we've talked about total cost of ownership, that's the TCO, and the yield. So these have a relationship with the levelized cost of energy. So from all what we have presented so far, we can see that the total cost of ownership is, of course, reduced because of the attributes of the Tauro. And of course, the yield is, of course, maximized. So once this is done, with the relationship, as you can see here, it, of course, leads to a low LCOE, that is a low levelized cost of energy. And once you have a low levelized cost of energy, it, of course, leads to rapid amortization. All thanks, of course, and once again, to the Fronius Tauro. Great, so that brings us to the end of the presentation for today. Just to give you further information, if we look at your GoToWebinar tab, you will see a pane called Handout. So we have pasted the data sheets of the Fronius Tauro for you to download. So you can just go there and download it. And for further information, of course, you can visit our homepage, that is www.fronius.com, and go to the download section where you can get operating and installation instructions for your use. You can, of course, also visit our YouTube channel where you can get how-to and installation videos. And more specifically, you can have access to our compendium of all our past webinars for the Sub-Saharan African region using this link. So with this link, you can actually have direct access to all our previous webinars. And then there's any information at all you're looking for, you can of course get them from these videos, depending on the topic of concern. So for further inquiries, you can of course contact Mohammed Sidat, who is the Technical Sales Advisor for the Southern Africa region, myself for Western Africa, and David Mwangi for Eastern Africa for any further inquiries. And with that, we have come to the end of the presentation today. I want to say a very big thank you to all the attendees for sticking with us and attending this webinar. So we will be leaving the chat box open for about 5 minutes to answer your questions. And then afterwards, we will now end the webinar presentation. So on behalf of the presentation team today, I want to say a very big thank you and enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye.